Hey guys, what is up? It's Ashley from the Curl Haus, and we are so excited to welcome Ashley from the Red Cord. It is an honor to have you here on our podcast today. Could you tell us and our listeners a little bit about what Red Cord is, your background, and your work in combating human trafficking, and how did you get involved in the Red Cord?
Well, thank you so much for having us on your podcast. We really do appreciate it. And I was thinking when I got here, I don't think we've ever done anything with the salon. So this is like the first time we've ever done anything like this. So this is awesome. So the Red Cord, we were founded in 2015 by a local Lawtonian by the name of Cindy Evans. And what happened was the issue of human trafficking was brought to her attention via social media. And she thought, well, this would be an interesting cause to get behind, right? So she began to look around to see if she could find an organization locally to join. And that's when she found out there was nothing in all of Southwest Oklahoma for her to get involved in. So she went up to the state level, spoke to Agent Michael Snowden, who used to be the agent in charge for the trafficking task force team, and was like, what do I do? What is something that I could start that would be beneficial to the movement as a whole? And he said, education. Do something in education. So she came back down to Lawton, and the Red Cord was born. So it was just her and the co-founder, Joe Mobley. The two of them put together a presentation, and they went around to all the churches that they could, eventually moving out to different social groups, and just did a 30-minute presentation. And that just grew into people wanting to get involved in that. We became incorporated shortly after the founding, and here we are today. We've been trudging along. So we've got a lot of trainers now that we send out across the whole state of Oklahoma, and also North Texas as well. And we do education now for not only educators, community members, but medical personnel, first responders. We are CLEAT certified, so we do that with law enforcement. And that's just kind of how we got started. But education, prevention, awareness, and support, those are the pillars of our organization.
Beautiful. Well, we're so happy to be, first of all, the first salon that you've ever gotten to talk to. I know we've had some experiences that have really encouraged us to reach out to you. And I feel like we're a very significant industry whenever it comes to trafficking, in the event that we can completely, change the appearance. But nobody knows if we don't know what to look for. And this is something that we never would have thought about if we weren't faced with it ourselves.
Yeah, so Ashley, I've kind of shared with you a little bit, but back in 2000 and what would you say, 19?
I think it's 2020, right? But right before we all had to leave.
Yeah,
it's COVID.
We had found ourselves in a situation, and it was a time when two of our clients had came in, and they were both children, and one, how old was the little girl?
I think the youngest one, she might have been like maybe 6. The other one, I don't know, maybe like 9. I don't really know. They were kind of small. It felt a little hard to judge. I feel like they might have been a little older than they appeared.
So the little girl, she sat with me that day, and I was her professional for the day. But she came in, and you sit down, you have a consultation with them, and the parents had sat in the lobby area, and the little girl had came back with me, and we just were talking, and she was so concerned with the way she looked and her appearance. And she's, in my mind, I thought she was probably 7 or 8. And so she cried the whole entire appointment. And I remember her hair being really short, but it was straight. And she told me that her parents made her get her hair straightened with a Brazilian blowout, which for me, I'm not blowing any little kid's hair out. I'm not putting chemicals on it. It just goes against everything that I believe in. So I found that a little bit alarming. But the most alarming thing about that appointment was the questions that she asked me. And one of them was, are you famous? And I said, no. She said, are you rich? I said, no. Do you live in a big house? No. Are your friends famous? No. Which I found very odd for a 7-year-old little girl to be asking me those questions. I mean, I have a 10-year-old, and at the time she would have been probably close to that little girl's age, and she doesn't ask questions like that. So that was alarming to me. Again, she was crying the whole entire appointment, and at that moment I was a little alarmed, and I went through and grabbed other staff members like, hey, come in here, tell me, what do you guys think? Am I overreacting? And everybody else seemed alarmed as well. But then the older brother came in, and his hair was blonde. and he has very, very dark hair, and he was not happy to be there. And I said, do you like your hair? No. I said, well, what do you not like about it? That it's blonde. Well, why don't you like the blonde? They made me color my hair. Again, to me, it goes against everything that I stand for. But just because I don't stand for that doesn't mean that other people did not. But I found the conversations very alarming and us stuck in a situation not knowing what to do. So what about you, Rose? Because you were there that day.
For me, I think the thing that bothered me the most is just how shooken up that these kids felt, and they felt so obligated to have to listen and to obey to change the way that they looked. And it wasn't, for me, it wasn't just the questions and the things that they were saying, the way that they were presenting themselves. Just the whole, I hate to bring up, it's a vibe, it's an energy, but it felt off and it felt weird and it was uncomfortable. And we didn't know how to handle the situation.
Yeah, I remember us sitting out in the front, and there was me, you, and Cameron. We were out in Elena. We were all out in the front trying to figure out what do we do. And at the end of the day, we didn't do anything. So, because we didn't know what to do. And then we didn't know if we were overreacting either, because then what if you are overreacting? Then that's a whole different, snowball effect. So
we were just starting as a salon too, that we didn't want to catch any backlash. But now I would have rather received backlash and done something rather than still sitting here 3 years later and wondering what more could I have done for them.
So we need your expertise. What do you look for? What do you do? Who do you call? What actions do you take?
So again, this goes back to why education is so important, right? I think we talked about before we started. We hear a lot of stories like that. It's the after the fact. There's that guilt. There's the should I, could I, what should I have done differently? I think one of the most impactful stories that I had heard of in a situation like that came from a Oklahoma highway patrolman. And this guy almost had tears in his eyes. He was so upset after we did a training. And he just kept saying, I failed. He's like, I missed it. Because as you were giving this presentation, I was thinking back to all of these cases that I've been on, these calls that I've run. And he was like, I'm just seeing these people's faces now thinking, oh my gosh, like I completely and totally missed it. And we don't want that, right? Who do we call in a situation like that? Well, that's not something that's posted publicly, right? I mean, it is, but if you don't know what you're looking for, then you can't find it. So we'll back up here a little bit with human trafficking, because I think definitions are really important, right? One of the issues that we have with fighting trafficking is there's a lot of misconceptions about what it looks like, what it is, what it's not. Human trafficking is not necessarily kidnapping. That's the biggest misconception that we hear. A lot of people think, oh, if it's trafficking, there's got to be a kidnapping component. Most trafficking does not have a kidnapping component to it. I believe last stat that I saw was about 5% or less had anything to do with kidnapping. In Oklahoma, the whole U.S., but really Oklahoma, we're just going to focus on that. The most common type of trafficking is familial trafficking. So that is a relative or someone that is very close to the family that is trafficking the individual. We've seen mom trafficking kids for rent. We've seen grandparents trafficking grandkids for grocery money, for drug money. We see a lot of spouses that do that, intimate partners. That's what it looks like. And that makes it harder, right? Because if it's a snatch and grab situation, then, or someone's chained up in a basement somewhere, that there's a lot of like overt signs that something's wrong. But when it comes down to it's a family situation, right? Or maybe it's a friend of the family situation, that's when we have to rely on the more subtle things, which would be that sixth sense, right? Mm-hmm. Intuition. That's a real thing. I know a lot of people go, oh, that's ridiculous. No, it actually is a real thing. And that's something that we want to be in tune with and know how to respond to. 80% of communication, they say, is nonverbal. You guys were picking up on a lot of nonverbal cues, even though you're like, I don't know, like what they said, does that really count? The biggest what you were picking on was what they weren't saying. How they were acting, how they were responding to that situation in comparison to what a normal kid would do. So going back to definitions here. So human trafficking, that is, it's an umbrella term, because underneath that you have sex trafficking, you have labor trafficking. So sex trafficking is in which a person is induced to provide a commercial sex act under the means of force, fraud, or coercion, which is, force, fraud, coercion, trickery, is pretty straightforward. Or in which the person who is they've obtained to provide that commercial sex act is under the age of 18. So we always say this, if someone is stuck in a trafficking situation and they are 17 and under, it is always seen as child sex trafficking. If you are 18 and older, you have to prove there's force, fraud, or coercion. It's not that hard to prove, but legally you have to prove that. But if you can prove that a child is providing any kind of a commercial sex act, it's automatically child sex trafficking. And then you have labor trafficking, right? So that's someone that's going to be brought in for their labor services. This can be seen in nail salons. This could be seen in massage parlors. This could be seen in the grow farms around the Oklahoma area. We're starting to see that a lot. This could be seen in the construction work, nannying, housekeeping. That's what that looks like. So there's not a sexual component to it. So going back to your situation, I'm assuming what you were saying, you weren't 100% sure if they actually were legitimate biological family. Is that one of the components to it?
I do feel like I did not see a comparison, but then again, I don't know. They could have been grandparents. They could have been anybody. But from what we could tell, at least I was under the impression that they were not biological.
So there's a really strong control mechanism, right? When you look at trafficking, when you look at it at its core, it's a power dynamic, right? When it comes to children, that's one of the most hardest things to pick up on, because you're trying to figure out, is this just a kid that's just being a little rebellious and having a bad day against a mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, or is this child trying to tell me something that's wrong? Since you said you have children, you know what a normal child acts like, right? I'm sure we've all been around kids. We've all been kids at one point, right? So we have that reference standpoint. When you're watching a child and you feel like there's something off, there seems to be some sort of weird conflict between them and the adult they're with. If you're noticing that this person does not look like they're connected to them, if there's not some adoption story, if there's not like a legitimate connection that they're making, that's one flag. Now, when I say that, I don't want people to go out and think, oh my goodness, this kid doesn't look like this woman, it's trafficking, right? Because in my situation, you would not think that my mother is my mother, but she is, right? But we have to have that rubric to rely on. So when something does flag, we can then look for the other flags. So the piece to that could be, what is the child talking about, right? Mm-hmm. So that was really good that you were listening to that kid. You realize that that's not really common. Like, why is this child talking about fame and money and wealth and things of that nature? Well, I don't know if that was a trafficking situation, but I do know that a common tactic that traffickers use to trick their victims is to make them think, hey, this is the way that we can make money. This is your pathway to fame. This is your pathway to fortune. They'll pull up certain things within our culture that shows, hey, if you do this is quick money. Look how glamorous this life could be if you just stick it out, right? You just like suck it up, stick it out, have to do the hard things. You're going to make money in the end. So there is that component too, because I've heard that multiple times from individuals who are in the trafficking world, who have come out of the trafficking world. They had that idea that no matter how bad it got, there was still that, rainbow at the end. They were going to get all that money. They were going to be able to retire early. They were going to have that fancy car, all the clothing, the jewelry, all of that they wanted. So that's what they were focused on. So like I said, I can't say for sure if that was a trafficking situation, but you guys were you were doing your part by picking up on certain red flags that were there, things that were not normal. Because someone in a trafficking situation, even though they might look like you and I, they do. I mean, there's not anything that looks different necessarily about them. Their reality is different. Their perception of reality is different. So whenever you get a chance to be in close proximity to them for a little amount of time, you're going to start noticing that there's those differences. Like, this doesn't make sense. This is not a normal conversation I'm having with this person right now.
All right, guys, welcome back. It's Ben with the Curl Haus podcast. I'm here with Ashley Brierton, Rissa, and Ashley C. from the Red Cord. We're going to kind of circle back to human trafficking and prevention and how it relates to the salon. So what are some common signs or indicators that salon owners, employees, or even other clients in the salon could be aware of that might suggest human trafficking is taking place? I mean, right in our chairs.
So there's a couple angles that you could take with this. So I think in the beauty industry, there's two different avenues that trafficking affects it. One is we do see a lot of like labor trafficking, right? Like we kind of mentioned before about the spas and massage parlors and you know, things like that. So it could potentially be the person that's providing the service, right? So I've heard of one story. This was not a local story, but I've heard of one story where this young woman was just getting started out and she couldn't afford her chair. And so the individual that she was working through was like, well, have you ever considered potentially doing some side work to cover the cost? And she's like, well, what do you mean by side work? Well, it ended up becoming a sex situation where they were like, let's do maybe some extra favors for some people after hours, and we'll count all of your dues as paid. So it became a labor trafficking turned into a sex trafficking situation. So, I mean, she saw clients all the time, but no one knew about that, right? Now, it was her fellow ladies that were around her, right, that picked up on like, yeah, there's something weird here. Like, why are you always staying late? And there's a weird connection between you and the person that we're working under. So that's one way that, it can come into the salon industry. But the other could be, like we were talking about, the person that's sitting in the chair. So when it comes to sex trafficking, the thing is the trafficker is trying to make his product the most desirable out there on the market, right? So there's that beautification component to it. Whenever you start looking at a lot of the women that are in sex trafficking that are like the high end, they look glamorous, right? They've got the hair extensions, they've got the nails, they've got the skin treatments, the beautiful makeup. So that's something that a trafficker is willing to invest a lot of money in because, again, he's trying to make his product the best that's out there. So you guys do see a lot of people that potentially could be in a trafficking situation. The best way to get to that is to use the gift of gab, right? I don't know what it is, but whenever you're in a chair, right, and you're laying back and they're like washing your hair, you just like want to tell everything. And then after the fact, you're just like, did I really just tell them my whole life story in like 40 minutes? But there's something soothing and therapeutic about it, right? So once you build that trust, and once you as the provider of that service, you're using that moment to put a lot of positivity into that person, that goes a long way. That really does. Because then they start to think, well, she's okay. Everyone else is dumb. Everyone else doesn't understand me, but she understands me. She's someone that I could talk to. She's someone that I'm going to see on a regular basis, right? So you're building that relationship. Sometimes a trafficker, if they don't trust their victim, they will come in with their victim. They will be very controlling. They're like, she's going to get this hair color. She's going to get, her hair cut this length. She's going to get these nails. She's going to get whatever. That does happen. And that obviously comes across as a very, a toxic relationship. And it could just be a domestic violence situation, right? Or it could be, there could be an exploitative component to it. But eventually, traffickers, pimps, whatever you want to call them, they've got other things to do. So if this is a normal thing for her to get her hair done or for her nails or whatever, she's probably going to come in by herself at some point. Eventually, because he's going to think that this is a safe place for her, right? Traffickers like to train their victims almost like you would with like a dog or a horse or any kind of animal type of a thing. They get them to the point where they think, okay, she's okay. I know she's not going to blab what's going on. Or I know that she's loyal to me. Like she has this trauma bond to me. So she's not going to step outside of lines. But that's when we come in because they're not thinking that we have already picked up on some of the signs. So we're going to be overly attentive to this individual. We're going to be overly sensitive to what this person says, what they do, and try and get them to come to that point where maybe they're just going to say one day, what's going on with me it's not good. I'm like, well, what do you mean it's not great? You know, and then to start that conversation.
So what do we do if we think that that situation's going on? Is there a hotline that we can call? Do we reach out to the police?
So I always say if it's like an immediate emergency situation, like if the trafficker is pulling the person out of the salon by the hair, right? Definitely call 911. You know, don't try to be the police unless you are the police. That's one of the things I've had to learn, because sometimes it ends up, you know, causing more harm than good. Because if a trafficker picks up that his victim has been giving off victim signs, they're not coming back. Plus, that victim is going to get punished severely because apparently she or he is not trained well enough, right? So the next time he's not going to do that. So I always say that, you know, whenever talking to someone that you're picking up on the vibe of, there might be an exploitative component to what they do. So if they start talking about like stripping, escorting, you know, sugar dadding, things like that, those are hotbeds for sex trafficking. If anyone would list that as what their occupation was, I would immediately have like all of my senses up, because I just know how prevalent it is in that system. But I'm not going to say anything with the word human trafficking in it. I'm not going to say anything about trafficker or pimp or anything like that. One of the things I'm going to lead with is, are you safe? Like, you know, what's your life like? What's going on? You know, use very neutral language. Don't be very specific about it, because if you start saying certain buzzwords, one, they're going to run from you, or two, they're going to go, yeah, no, that's not me. That's not what's going on with me, because they don't think that's what's going on with them. They just think it's a domestic violence situation. They don't realize that they're a victim of sex trafficking. But should you get those pieces together and someone maybe does share their life story with you and tell you what's going on, and you're like, yeah, this is a trafficking component or trafficking situation, there is a national human trafficking hotline, and that is 1-888-373-7888. And so what you're going to do with that is you can call that, you can be completely anonymous, and you can just say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. If you are not the victim, you let them know that, and then you just give them any bit of information that you've picked up on. This is basically a tip line. Now, with this hotline, they're not going to come bursting through your door 30 minutes later, right? It's not activating SWAT necessarily. But what they do is they take all that information, as much information you can get, like what they're driving, what the license plate is, what tattoos, you know, the victim or potentially the trafficker had, what those look like, the hair color, anything that you can piece together. You take that, you give that to them. What they do then is they put that in a nice little file, and they contact the trafficking task force team for the state of Oklahoma, and they hand that to them and say, this is what we just received. And then they take it over from there. That is how that works. Now, if you are a victim of trafficking and you have come to the point where it's just a realization that I am a sex trafficking victim, which is rare to come to that realization. But if that's the component, if that happens, then you can reach out to the hotline directly yourself, and then you will have direct, immediate intervention that occurs, because then they're going to, you know, connect you to law enforcement, connect you to those service providers that you need in that situation.
Just a few things that we've done here in the salon. We've talked about what can we be doing to do more to set ourselves up for success, or anybody that could be walking through the doors that needs us but doesn't openly want to say something. We've talked about putting legislation in the bathrooms about local safe houses, shelters, things like that. And now knowing in the hotline, I want to incorporate that in there in some way. We've talked about creating a policy for if there's ever a time where we feel like somebody in our chair is unsafe, where maybe we, you know, find a way to tour them into a different room to ask them, are you safe? But it's kind of hard to know when that's appropriate, because like you said, if the reaction goes badly, then they could be punished for it. Mm-hmm. What is your insight on what else can we be doing in the salon to react better for them, other than just being able to call the hotline? Is there things that we can be putting out for them?
I love the idea about the signs on the bathroom doors, because that is something that we, the Red Cord, we've tried to get that rolling here in Southwest Oklahoma, because that's most of the time they're going to the bathroom by themselves. And that's, if they're with a trafficker, that's like maybe the only place that they're by themselves, right? Whenever you're creating a poster or something like that, one, make it subtle, but also make it relatable to whoever is coming into your establishment, right? So that could look like, getting pictures of models with curly hair or something like that, right? Like, I would say don't get a poster with this like dejected looking woman with bruises on her face just looking at you, right? I hate those, right? Because when they look at that, they're like, oh yeah, that's not me. That poor woman, but that's not me. I don't have those bruises. My hair looks beautiful. I'm not dirty. I'm not in the streets. That woman is a different person. But if you get someone that looks relatable, and then you have common language that's on there, oftentimes what we've noticed that works the best, survivors have said what worked the best for them was asking the questions of, are you in XYZ? Have you experienced XYZ? Make them connect the dots. Don't say on there, if you are in this situation, you are a victim of sex trafficking. That for some reason just does not compute. But definitely having that. If you also want to do like brochures, or there's little indicator cards that I could, the Red Cord, we could provide to you as well. Little wallet size indicator cards. The bullet points basically of some of the most common indicators that we see with an individual that might be in a trafficking situation. Having those around, that people can take with them or whatnot. Drawing attention via like fundraisers, or, utilizing your services at some of the shelters that we have that deal with sex trafficking victims. There's a whole lot of ways to get involved and impact this movement, but I definitely like the idea about the signs on the doors. I would do that.
We're definitely going to take you up on the flyers and things like that. So
Absolutely.
Awesome.
You had talked about fundraising. You guys have an event coming up this month.
We do.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
So we have our annual gala, or gala, however you say it, that's coming up September 30th. And we started that several years ago now. I think this is our 8th gala that we're having. And so, what we do is we bring in different speakers from around the world now. They come in and they talk to our audiences about different areas, different avenues that they've taken into the trafficking, the anti-trafficking world. So this year we have actually 2 special guest speakers that we're bringing in. So we're bringing in Kristen and Jason Weiss. They're from the Tulsa area. They are the founders of the Demand Project. Super cool individuals. Jason used to work for Tulsa County, in dealing specifically with child sex trafficking. So he's the guy that like kicks down the doors. Like, he's so cool. And then Kristen, she kind of oversees the Demand Project, the Aruka Farms, which is it's a 60-bed shelter specifically for sex trafficking victims. And they work a lot with children in that realm. So that's one of our guest speakers that's coming. And the second is Miss Jenna Quinn, coming up from Texas. She actually is the namesake for Jenna's Law, which is one of the groundbreaking legislations about, protecting children against sexual abuse, and it's expanded into child sex trafficking. And they've modeled after Texas at the national level now to have that. So she's coming, and she's going to talk a little bit about her experience growing up. She was not in a sex trafficking situation. However, she was a victim of child sexual abuse. And because of that, it opened her eyes as an adult to what she does now. And she does a lot of work with children in the sex trafficking world because she has a little bit of that connection with them from her own experience. So she's going to come and talk from more of the victim perspective. The theme is Rise Up. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get normal people that are not affected by this to join the fight, because that's the biggest issue that we find is this is a dark topic. No one wants to look into it. If it doesn't affect your family, doesn't affect you personally, you don't want to get into this, right? It's depressing. It's a lot of things. But we need more good people to do that. We need a lot of people to stand up, to rise up and say, you know what, this hasn't affected my family yet, but it's unacceptable that it's affecting anyone. And there's things that we can all do to help that movement. So that's what we're hoping with this gala.
I'm
Right.
so excited.
Well, we're looking forward to attending that. That is something that is really important to us because we are in the salon industry, because we can change people's appearances, because, thankfully not here, but, in schools, it could happen. It could be your coworkers, it could be, anyone. And so thank you for coming to talk to us about it. We're really excited to attend the gala. We want to be those everyday people that care. Because it's not affecting us directly doesn't mean it's not affecting our guest. Doesn't mean that it's not, affecting anybody going through, like you said, people who are in the salon or beauty industry. The biggest takeaways for me are that there is help out there, that you can get help if you need it, that there is a hotline that exists, that, we all play this really important part in taking care of each other. So I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to be with us today, sharing your expertise. This is a scary issue. Like you said, it's heavy. But if we don't talk about it, we cannot be the difference. What is any last message that you would like to share with our listeners?
I think the final thing that I would say is when you look at sex trafficking, labor trafficking, human trafficking as a whole, we need to understand that it's modern day slavery, right? So I love history. And when I look back into the early American history, the transatlantic slave trade, right? How did that get attacked, right? What did that movement look like? The abolitionists back then, what did they have to do to at least stop the outward, the public expression of slavery? And I like to take from what they did, but one of the individuals that we really like to quote and use his tactics was Frederick Douglass. So he was a former slave, who came out on the freedom side, and he had a really interesting observation when he looked back at some of his fellow former slaves, and he said some of them weren't doing good, some of them were actually going back into slave-like situations. He noticed that there was one thing that was in common between those that were doing well and those that were not. And he said, it's knowledge. So he said this quote, which I love. He says, knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Oh, I just got chill bumps all over my whole body.
Yeah.
And that's still true today, right? This version of slavery looks a little bit different, but it's still the same at its core, right? So knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave. That's something, again, why we're so big on education, because we've seen it happen. I would much rather prevent someone from going into it than having to work with, the lifelong process of healing afterwards. And that's what we're here for.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.